Put it in the report. Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. So here we have two young gentlemen that are currently PhD students at Carnegie Mellon. And personally, and along with several other people, I've been trying for a long time, in a way, to get hold of Carnegie Mellon, because they have done some outstanding work into password research. And a couple of the papers that have been released earlier from CMU also came as, I would say, a big of a surprise to many of us in the crazy password community around the world. And finally, I got in touch with them, and they submitted to our call for presentations, and I was ecstatic for that. So with that introduction, I can just say, good luck, guys. I'm looking forward to this one. So be good.
Great. Great. Thanks very much, Per. So good afternoon. I'm Blazer, and I'm Sean Segreti. Yep, and we're representing our group at Carnegie Mellon University and talking about the continuing quest for secure and usable passwords. And we'd like to take questions at the end, if that's okay. You might notice that, as Julia mentioned this morning, normal people don't wear passwords apparel, yet here we are with our official passwords ties. These are among the most common passwords in Rockio.
And funny story, when these ties were originally made, a substring of password is so they're not ours. All right, we can start.
Great. All right. So I think I don't have to convince many of us in this room that when left to their own devices, users tend to make not very good passwords. Right. So how do sysadmins deal with this? Well, the current state of affairs is that for the most part, sysadmins come up with a bunch of restrictions that say, hey, you must do the following, and that's how we'll help you get good passwords. And what results from this, unfortunately, is not good passwords. It's, number one, users who are annoyed that we have to do all of these things. And number two, dumb passwords that now meet these requirements. Right? So our research group has, for the last few years, been trying to find ways to help users create better passwords. And we have two big goals in this project. One is that we noticed coming into the project that a lot of the guidance on passwords was based on intuition or best guesses about what people did. So what we decided to do is approach it mainly with controlled scientific experiments. That is applying scientific method to passwords research. And number two is, we noticed that there are a lot of groups doing really great security work in passwords, and a handful of groups doing usability work in passwords, and not that many groups doing things that are really at the intersection of these. So we wanted to consider both security and usability of passwords as primary goals.
So we have a couple of metrics to measure password security, but our primary method is what we call guessability. And we don't have time to go into detail on all of it, but we can assert from our past work that guessability is a better representation of password strength over something like entropy. So guessability, simply put, is how many guesses would be required given some guessing algorithm and some input, whether that be dictionaries, training data, probabilistic models, mangling rules. How many guesses would you require to guess a password? And guessability has a nice property that it's independent of hashing and yet still linked to cracking wall time. So given a guessability plot, you can get a good idea how long something would crack given your hardware and the hash used. And we calculate guessability primarily by using the probabilistic context-free grammar proposed by Weir et al. From Florida State. But in our ongoing work, we also do other methods as well. So Weir et al.'s PCFG basically it works by taking in training data, and from the training data it learns structures. And if you're a Hashcat user, that's the same thing as a mask. And then it outputs guesses based on probability of the structures and the strings that it sees that can be combined to meet those structures. And the reasons we do this, we have a couple. So first off, in academic literature, this is considered the state-of-the-art approach in terms of efficiency in guessing. Second, we've made our own improvements to it, and I'll share some of them later. Third, other approaches like John the Ripper and Hashcat require a fair amount of heuristics. So if you want to do an optimal attack with John the Ripper or Hashcat, you really have to know what you're doing, and who's to say that we do? And fourth, we've implemented what we call a lookup table, so we can calculate guessability without having to output a gazillion of incorrect guesses before reaching the correct guess. So here's a guessability plot like some of the many that are about to come. Each color represents a different password set. X-axis is how many guesses, and Y-axis is what portion of the password set was cracked. So you can look at this and say, pick a point, find the guess number on the X-axis, then go to the Y-axis and see how many were guessed at that point, factor in your hashing algorithm, and have a good idea how long it would take to crack with this given guessing algorithm. So for our usability metrics that we consider for these passwords, we have a number of them. Some of them we get through automatic methods, like on our experiment servers, we can automatically record attempt information or timing data. And then other things we have to just directly ask people through surveys or interviews, such as, was your password difficult to create, difficult to remember? Did you write it down? How did you write it down? And we use these metrics to try to identify traits that can make the whole password experience just better for the average person.
So where do we get the passwords that we study? And short answer is from a lot of different places, depending on the analysis we're using. So we've done some analyses, using the leaked password sets that many of the people in this room have also studied. We also have looked at high-value passwords from our university, and I'll be telling you about that in a moment. But then, there's a lot of things we want to do where we want people to create passwords under certain conditions, certain requirements, certain circumstances. And for those, we actually have to have people create studies. And we've done both online studies and lab studies. And I'll primarily be talking about online studies today. And so, you might wonder, why are we doing these online studies? There's all these large password leaks with real passwords. Why are we getting these fake passwords? The problem with a lot of these leaks is that, there's not information for the most part about usability in these leaks. And that's one of our primary questions. We also can't create controlled experiments to compare different techniques. So we can't, go back and say, in the RockU leak, half the people do this, half the people do this. And similarly, we can't go to a company and say, oh, we have this crazy idea and no evidence it works. Let's try it out. Have a third of the people at your company do this, right? So, the first step in these is to use these online studies and lab studies. Right. A lot of these online experiments, we've used Amazon's Mechanical Turk crowdsourcing service. And so for kind of the short version of what a protocol like this might look like, we have participants, do a role play, imagining that their primary email account has asked them to change their password. And they go and create a password, and we record keystrokes and all kinds of information about what they're doing. Then they answer survey questions about, the password creation experience, the password they just created. And then we have them recall their password, type it in again. Then 2 days later, we send them an email and ask them to come back and again try and type in their password and answer survey questions about how they remembered, or as the case may be, failed to remember their password. Right? And so through this mechanism, at this point, we've studied over 30,000 participants making passwords with rich supporting data, everything from surveys to keystrokes. Right? And so, many of you are probably asking the question, well, how legit and how real are these passwords? And we asked ourselves the same question. So we did a study where we, among other things, compared these types of passwords we're collecting in online studies to those in use at our university, Carnegie Mellon. That is, we studied 25,000 real high-value passwords from the CMU sign-on system, a single sign-on system, representing all the faculty, staff, and students who were active at the time. We also had contextual data, that is, access logs, detailed demographics, which the university collects and are quite accurate, and survey responses. And so going into this project, we had one question we had to answer first, which is how do we access this real data responsibly? We also had two main questions we wanted to answer. First, as I alluded to earlier, how similar are these mturk passwords to real passwords? And also, what factors seem to correlate to password strength? So I'll go through each of these three. So accessing real data responsibly. So this single sign-on system I mentioned, it's, this password grants access to that user's email account, financial information, financial aid for students, payroll for employees, grades, same thing, registration, information with the CMU Health Center, etc. So we didn't want to take this lightly. And so as a result, we never saw plain text passwords, but our code did. And at this point, I'm sure some alarm bells are going out through this room. Surely you do not mean plain text passwords. Surely you mean salted and hashed with the computationally expensive hashing algorithm passwords. But no, we actually do mean plain text passwords. So when we started this study a couple of years ago, and started working with the ISO at CMU, we found out that passwords were reversibly encrypted in the system that they used. And this was not a bug. This was a feature. Because according to all the vendors who sold them the system, this would allow them to interface with legacy systems that wouldn't be able to support Kerberos. And so then when we had discussions with them, said, you probably don't want to do this. They agreed. They went around shopping for a new system, and all the vendors they talked to said, no, we actually do the same thing. So they had to, they've since transitioned away from this, but they had to roll their own system. And so, so we said, well, we have all these plaintext passwords for every user at CMU. Let's write code to analyze them and output all kinds of, analyses of questions we'd like to ask. So what we did is we wrote code, sent it over to the ISO personnel. They manually did a code audit. They got their own systems, installed everything from source, never connected the machine to the internet, ran the code, printed out the output to prevent covert channels, and they inspected it and hand-delivered the output of our analyses to us on paper. Right? And so we took these kind of extraordinary steps because we didn't want to cause security issues for the users at CMU. Right? And so this was a lot of work. This project actually went on for over 3 years. Lots of conversations with lawyers and everything along the way. Right? And so we want to ask, well, if we compare these real CMU passwords to passwords that we can get with much less effort, so things like passwords from RockU, Yahoo, all the other big leaks, in what we call conforming subsets. That is, if we take all the passwords from these leaks that would have been valid under CMU's password composition policy, which requires all 4 character classes, a dictionary check, and 8 or more characters. So if we compare those to the real CMU passwords, and we also compare the passwords that we're collecting from mturk to these real CMU passwords, which seems to be kind of the low-cost equivalent of studying passwords that better matches these real passwords. We looked at a number of metrics for comparison. We looked at the composition and structures of the passwords. We looked at the frequency distribution of different passwords in each of these sets. And we also looked at guessability against the PCFG algorithm. Right. And so the short answer is, taking all metrics into account, the mturk passwords ended up closer to real passwords than these conforming subsets of leak data. And that is, they weren't perfect. There's some junk in there, but for the kinds of questions we're asking, they turn out to be, really useful for our research and a pretty good proxy for real passwords. So to give you a sense of these kinds of things, if we look at some characteristics of passwords like length, number of digits, number of symbols, and we compare in black the real CMU passwords to, in green, the mturk passwords that were closest to it in composition policy, and then to a whole bunch of conforming subsets of leaked passwords, and then other mturk passwords with different composition policies. This is just a couple of them. We had a whole bunch of these kinds of metrics. Again, across these, the mturk passwords most closely resembled the composition of these real CMU passwords. Right. We also looked at the guessability. So this black line represents the CMU passwords. So again, guess number on the x-axis and a log scale is how many guesses did it take this password cracking algorithm to get to that password. And on the y-axis, we have the proportion of the set that was guessed by that point. So that is, higher up are worse passwords, lower down in the bottom right corner are stronger passwords. Right. So if we compare, for instance, Gawker and Stratfor conforming subsets, we find these are actually pretty easy to guess, but note that these leaks were actually based on cracked passwords. The leaks were hashed. Right. So basically, these passwords that were easy, that were cracked, were again able to be cracked at a reasonably high rate. Right. So we also looked at RockU, CSDN, Yahoo leaks, and RockU leak actually tracked the real CMU passwords closely. That is, for those passwords in RockU, the small fraction that would have been valid CMU passwords, whereas the others not as much. So it's kind of along all these different leak subsets, it's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes it's close, sometimes it's not, and it's hard to know in advance whether it will be. So then the green lines are the 2 different sets of passwords we collected from mturk, one simulating the look and feel of CMU site and one not doing so. with the same composition policy. And we found, again, they're not quite, tracking it super closely, but they're relatively close. And for, the purposes we're using them for, it's pretty much good enough. Right. So then we also investigated how different characteristics, both demographics and those of the passwords, correlated with password strength, and guessability. So, as you might guess, the use and placement of things like digits and special characters, like whether digits were at the end versus whether digits were spread out or stuck in the middle of the password somewhere, yes, indeed was correlated. It was easier to guess passwords where digits and symbols were at the end. Going into the project, we had assumed that age and the role at the university, thing like, is this a person, a faculty member, staff, or student, would correlate with password strength. We didn't find that to be the case. There were no significant correlations there. However, the department affiliation at CMU did correlate with password strength. So these different lines, each of them represents a different academic department at CMU. So you'll notice the green passwords were the easiest to guess, and the navy blue passwords were the hardest. And it was actually quite a bit different. So 1.8 times more were cracked in the green set. So we'll play a guessing game. So the navy blue line, the strongest passwords, which department do you think that is? Liberal arts. Oh, no.
Not engineers.
The strongest passwords? The strongest passwords, yeah. Well, so the blue one, the strongest passwords were the computer scientists. The weakest passwords, the green line. The business school. Yes. So those are the people we're putting in charge. Yes. Mm-hmm.
People who talk foreign languages, their password strength?
Yeah, so we basically binned different groups together. We didn't want to have, an analysis that says the one Russian studies major who's, dual with computer science, this is the characteristics of their password. So some of those kinds of analyses got kind of binned together into, humanities. Yeah. All right.
Okay. So let me remind you of our overarching goal out of all of this, which is to improve the password experience for the average user. And we started out on this trek by considering password composition policies. So this work started back in 2010, 2011 by collecting passwords under controlled conditions. So each condition that we collected had a different password enforcement policy, and they're listed here. Basic 8 is pretty simple, just a 8-character length check. Comp 8 or comprehensive 8. Same is a subset of Basic 8, but requires all 4 character classes and a dictionary check. Basic 16 is just an extension of Basic 8 with 16 characters. The blacklist conditions, there were 3, easy, medium, and hard with increasing blacklist size, and in addition, 8-character length check. And dictionary 8 just meant that there's no substring inside the password that was found in a dictionary. And the dictionary in dictionary 8 was the exact same one in Comp 8. So we collected a whole bunch of these passwords and then we cracked them. And as you can see, there's a big difference in cracking resistance, with, for example, Basic 16 performing 5 times better than Basic 8 at our guess cutoff, which is around 1 times 10 to the 13. So now we begin a process of elimination to try to find the best ones. So if we take the top 3 by strength, which are Blacklist, Hard, Comprehensive 8, and Basic 16, and then also consider in the usability metrics that we collected, well, it turns out we can eliminate Blacklist Hard almost immediately because it was almost impossible to use. And this is interesting because, if you think about it, if you make a password that fails the blacklist check, you're kind of lost. You don't know what to do. Basically, just try harder. So a lot of our participants had trouble with this. However, from here we can take note that Basic 16, while it performed the best in the long term, performed fairly poorly in the beginning, with its contender Comprehensive 8 performing much better in the beginning. And this is because you can't stop people from making really bad passwords, such as password, baseball, and they still pass the Basic 16 check. So another thing we learned from this is that the longer passwords, Basic 16, was across the board more usable than a shorter, more complex password policy, as it was easier to create, easier to remember, written down less, and our users expressed a more positive sentiment about the whole experience. So the takeaways from this is that longer passwords hold merit in terms of a password composition policy, even if they're simpler than a shorter password policy. However, if we can eliminate these few outliers in the beginning that are just really bad passwords and easy to guess, then maybe we're onto something. So we took this and we did another study where we explored the area around basic 16, trying to eliminate those easy to guess passwords right in the very beginning of guessing. And we did this by taking 7 longer than usual password policies and compared them to Comp8. And the policies we came up with were basic 12, 16, and 20, pretty self-explanatory. Comp8 as a baseline, 2-word 12 and 2-word 16, which basically means 2 strings of alphas separated by a non-alpha in the middle, and 3-class 12 and 3-class 16, which just means you have to have at least 3 character classes and then pass the length check. Now, before we cracked these collected passwords, we had to make some improvements to the PCFG approach. We made 3 major improvements in this part. First off, we tokenized long strings. That is, we break long strings of a single character class into words, and we do this by analyzing the Google's web corpus for n-grams. And this means that instead of treating the terminals in the grammar as just strings of a common character class, now they're actual words. The second improvement we did is we now sort strings by their probabilities in the training data. And this is important because in the original PCFG approach, all strings are treated with uniform probability. And a side effect of doing this is that it greatly increased our computation overhead in terms of time and memory. And we can mitigate this by quantizing our probabilities to increase the lookup speed at a small cost of guessing accuracy. So as you can see here, there's quite a big difference again in the guessing resistance for each of these policies. And we apply the same process of elimination to try to find the good ones. So if you consider the top 5 here, 3-class 12, basic 16 and 20, 2-word 16, and 3-class 16, well, we can once again eliminate basic 16 and basic 20 right off the bat because they still exhibit that poor resistance to guessing early. That is, there's those same easy to guess passwords that the policy doesn't prevent. And that leaves us with 3 front runners, 3-class 12, 2-word 16, and 3-class 16. So now we consider the usability of these. So in this chart, you can look at the green boxes, meaning that they were better in Comp8 in that particular metric, and the red is significantly worse. And if you look at the 3 across the bottom, which are our 3 front runners, 2-word 16, 3-class 12, and 3-class 16, it's clear that 2-word 16 and 3-class 12 are, again, across the board better than Comp8 in terms of usability and better than Comp8 in terms of security. At this point, we decided to eliminate 3-class 16 from our search because 40% of our participants thought that it was too difficult to create and had a significantly longer entry time. So we recommend to sysadmins that you choose one of these 2 policies, either 3-class 12 or 2-word 16, and it comes with a slight trade-off. 3-class 12 is a little bit easier to create for your users. They'll be less confused in the beginning. And 2-word 16 shows a little bit stronger guessing resistance, and it's up to you as the sysadmin to decide which one is right for your environment.
So we haven't just been studying password composition policies. So for a flavor of one of our other studies, we looked at password strength meters. These kinds of things you find all over the web, and said, well, what effect do they have, if any? And also we noted, they come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and colors. Well, which design aspects, if any, matter? And so we did, we made a baseline meter, and created a bunch that differed visually from it. So we had a segmented bar, one that didn't change color, it was always green, a really tiny meter, a really big meter, took away suggestions, we took away the bar, and we also said, well, what if we take away the bar and replace it with something else, something a little bit sillier? And so we made a dancing bunny meter, where the stronger your password, the faster Bugs Bunny dances. Right, and so, yeah, as you start going on, he really gets going. Yeah. Yeah. And so we also tried a bunch that looked just like this baseline meter we created, but differed in the way they scored passwords. And the way they scored them was, in 2 cases, much more stringently. In one, we gave half the score that we normally would, and the other 1/3 of the score we normally would. And then 2 others, we tried pushing people towards a particular password composition policy. Right? And what we found across these is that meters actually do make a difference, both in the composition of passwords, things like the length, the inclusion of different character classes where they're putting them, and also in this guessability, the security against this guessing attack. We found that all meters with visual components and text helped users create passwords, create better passwords. However, size didn't matter much. Color didn't matter much. Whether it was a bar or a bunny didn't matter much. As long as there was some feedback, it helped people. We also found that the stringency of the scoring algorithm matters quite a lot. So the one that gave half the score, participants made much longer and in the end harder to guess passwords. And our working hypothesis here is that no one wants to be bad. So if their password strength meter was telling them your password's bad, they kept trying until they were at least okay. Right, but this has its limits. However, there was the really stringent one that gave a third of the score, and we found people just gave up. They tried to make it better, and the meter kept telling them that they were bad, and then they're whatever. Your meter's broken, right? So that's kind of some highlights of the past couple of years of work, and just wanted to really quickly give an overview of some of our ongoing work. We have a project looking keystroke by keystroke at how people create passwords and, which characters they're adding, when they're deleting, all this enter key timings and things like that. We're doing a series of interviews about password creation where we're bringing people into the lab, having them create passwords in front of us. And when they're doing the kinds of things we see, like, why did you put a 1 and an exclamation point at the end and say that makes a secure password? Well, because people told me passwords with digits and symbols are secure passwords. Okay. Why are there so many monkeys in your passwords? Things like that. We're doing an analysis of mobile password creation. That's where data collection's ongoing. We also are wrapping up a project where we're looking at the sensitivity of guessability to the cracking algorithm or a tool used. So here shout outs in particular to the devs of John the Ripper, Hashcat, folks from CoreLogic, all for providing tools or helping us directly in that particular project. All right. So on behalf of the whole group, thanks very much. And we can take a couple questions, like 1 or 2 questions now before lunch. And Sean and I are both happy to continue taking questions throughout today and tomorrow. Okay, thanks.
Any questions at all?
Yes.
For your MTurk study.
Actually, sir.
For your MTurk studies, did you restrict to U.S. or did you use global?
So depending on the study we were doing, and some we restricted to the U.S. only, and some we did global, and then examined differences. Since the population of MTurks primarily U.S. and India, so those where we had people from both U.S. and India, we actually compared the two. But for studies we did that relied on English language knowledge or things like that, we restricted it to the U.S. only.
And you found real differences between those two sets when you did those?
Yeah, we did find some differences between them, and I mean some of them. There were some objective differences, and then also some where the security results would look different because we're training mostly on English language training data and trying to crack passwords. We would get Hindi passwords, sometimes.
I'd like to follow up with you offline about that on the line.
Yeah, great.
So the plots ended at 10 to the 13 guesses. Mm-hmm. Do we know how many guesses attackers make?
Yes. We in fact, Sean, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. So we simulated the PCFG approach, and if you're using something like Octal Hashcat on NTLM, you're not going to stop after 10 to the 13 guesses. You're going to keep on going. You'll hit that in a matter of hours. But this is kind of assuming that you're looking at passwords that are hashed with a slower algorithm than NTLM. And you can't just, run a mask attack and call it a day and blow through a lot of them because you can make a lot of guesses really, really fast. As for why we stopped at 10 to the 13, since we use a lookup table to calculate these guess numbers rather than actually outputting all of them, we ran out of size on our disk space. A lookup table that big is around 8 terabytes.
In some of our more recent work, we're going out to 10 to the 14, 10 to the 15. But it's all very, as we all know, it's an arms race based on hardware and attackers and everything like
that. You create a password once and then you enter it thousands of times. Mm-hmm. Did you consider how users found the usability of your different password classes?
Right. Yeah. So that's definitely a limitation of our methodology. As we decided to choose, can you enter it, 5 minutes after you make it and a couple days after you make it. And conceivably, we could have chosen lots of different things and looked at habituation over time to typing a password. That's not something we've looked at in any of our work so far, but it's on our radar, and we had to make some choices, and we made those choices.
And that's about it. Thanks, guys.